Good morning, everybody. Welcome to day two of the seventh G2MC International Conference. Uh, I'm pleased to see all of you this morning. We have a packed day. In the interest of time, I'm not going to take you through the day's program. I'm sure all of you have the program with you. So without further ado, let me move on to the introduce the keynote speaker this morning. Schully is unable to be with us because of the imminent lockdown of U.S. federal government, and in place of her, we have Bruce Korf talking to you. Bruce has also been a part of all of us all of us research program, so he's eminently suitable to give the same talk. Bruce, as you know, has been a founder of the G2MC, has been with us from the very beginning, playing a key role in all our committees, as well as now as co-chair. Bruce is the professor of genetics, chair in medical genetics at the University of Alabama in Birmingham, USA. He's also the chief genomics officer of the UAB medical system and associate director for rare diseases, as well as the Hugh called Personalized Medicine Institute, Associate Director for Rare Diseases at the Hugh Call Personalized Medicine Institute. In addition, he is also the co-director of UAB Alpha Hudson Center for Genomic Medicine. As you all may know, Bruce is a medical geneticist, a pediatrician, and a child neurologist certified by the American Board of Medical Genetics. He is also a past president of the Association of Professors of Human and Medical Genetics and past president of the American College of Medical Genetics and Genomics. Currently, he's the president of the ACMG Foundation for Genetics and Genomic Medicine. He has served on boards of scientific counselors of the National Cancer Institute and the National Human Genome Research Institute at NIH. He chairs the Medical Advisory Committee for Children's Tumor Foundation and serves on the CTF Board of Directors. So it gives me great pleasure to invite Bruce to address you and to take us through the All for US research program. Over to you, Bruce.
Well, thanks, Sheri. Thank you. Yeah, you've by now heard about all the challenges our NIH colleagues have had in traveling. And as Vijira said, I've been involved in the All of Us research program as the principal investigator of what's called the All of Us Southern Network, Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana, and serve on the science committee, which is advisory to the chief science and medical officer, which is Jeff, and Sheri is the deputy chief. So I don't speak for the leadership of all of us, but can give you at least, I hope, an idea of some of the goals and some of the opportunities represented by the program. Probably Jeff and Sheri are not listening online. In case you are, guys, it's 2 in the morning, and you do have other things I'm sure you could be doing. All right, let's go straight to here. So All of Us is a program that is run by the National Institutes of Health in the United States, and the overall goal, as you see here, is to nurture partnerships for a long period of time with at least 1 million participants across the United States and who reflect the diversity in the United States, and to provide from that a data set that is unprecedented in its quality and in terms of the breadth of information and the diversity of the participants, and at the same time also to catalyze this ecosystem of researchers who will use the data set. And part of the goal here really is to make these data available on a very wide basis. And in fact, diversity in many senses of the word is a cornerstone to this program. First of all, there is a very strong effort to engage people who have historically been underrepresented in biomedical research. And this requires a very substantial effort at community engagement, realizing that there is a history of distrust in many communities in the US based on issues that are in the past, but nevertheless, for many people, are still quite fresh in their mind. So community engagement, respect for participants, and viewing participants as true partners has been one of the kind of most fundamental components of the All of Us research program. And participants have been involved from the get-go in terms of defining the protocol and continuing to serve on various of the leadership committees as it's overseen. There will be many different kinds of data, which I'll describe in just a moment. There is a plan to make this longitudinal, so it's not just a snapshot in time, but we'll be tracking information about participants over time, and to be sure that the research data are accessible for researchers, and again, to build a diverse participant group, a diverse set of researchers, and diverse set of data. So the protocol, I'll walk you through the details of it. So I'm not going to try to do it on this slide, which may be a little hard to read, but just in a big picture way, individuals will enroll and consent, and most importantly, to authorize the release of de-identified data from their electronic health record. There are a number of surveys at the beginning and then continuing through time to continue to engage and learn more about participants. Some very basic physical measurements are done. Biosamples, mainly blood and urine, in some cases also saliva. And those that are into wearing digital devices that track various biometrical data can choose to share those data. The consent process is done online in a kind of video manner, and again, there is the consent to authorize release of the electronic health record. There are a number of data types that are listed here. I won't read through them. And then expanded data types that are in consideration and will be unrolled over time. There are a number of surveys. At the very beginning, there are some basic surveys that are answered about, as you can see, overall health, lifestyle, and so forth. And then there have been surveys and will continue to be surveys that are released to participants over time. During the COVID-19, sort of the peak of the pandemic, there was the COPE survey, which had to do with how people were handling the stresses that were associated with COVID-19, for example. And some of these surveys are fairly detailed. Some of them are relatively quick and easy to complete. The physical measurements are very basic. Individuals will make an appointment at various of the sites, although there's discussion also about gleaning some of these data points from the electronic health record. But as it stands right now, these kind of very basic measurements are provided. People get a form back telling them what the results were. Not that most people aren't aware of things like their height and weight. And biosamples are provided. Increasingly, the possibility of doing saliva samples, which makes it a little bit easier for participants who are remote from sites to participate. And that was especially important during these past few years. And then, as mentioned already, the use of specific mobile devices. So when All of Us began, there was nothing being done in terms of genome sequencing. The initial enrollments were done with the knowledge that eventually that would be done, but not at the time. And it then gradually unrolled. And there are 3 centers that are where genomic analysis is done. The various centers involved are listed at the right. And there is also a genetic counseling resource. And the reason for that is that participants can opt in to getting some information back from their genomic data. Now, the genomic data, by the way, includes a microarray, the Illumina Global Diversity Array, and also whole genome sequencing. And for a small subset now, also long-read sequencing has been offered, or at least been done on a subset of individuals. But a person who is participating can opt in to having a return of results. And at the moment, the return of results includes some very basic things, ancestry and some kind of genomic findings that are not of medical significance, whether cilantro is objectionable to you, as you know, as a genetic trait, for example. But also there is the ability to have return of results of the ACMG 59 genes. Now, the secondary finding list has been expanded, but right now it's limited to the 59 genes, and there is genetic counseling provided, as well as the ability to get free of charge confirmatory sequencing. And then there are a set of pharmacogenetic variants that are returned. Now, again, individuals can opt in or not to getting this information back. Actually, I guess this is just going into this in a little bit more detail. So the ACMG 59 genes, 7 pharmacogenetic variants, and then a number of genes related to ancestry and these traits that are listed at the right. Let me say a bit about some of the data that exists currently in the database. So there's something over 700,000 participants. And as you can imagine, participants were enrolled for the first couple of years, then COVID happened, and for a while everything was shut down because it wasn't safe to bring people in to do enrollments. And then gradually, as COVID ebbed to a degree at least, it became possible to open recruitment once again, and over time, things have ramped back up. So it is 70% of the way to the goal, at least in terms of individuals who have signed on. Now, not all of those have completed all of their initial entry into the program, so something under 500,000 have gone through the initial kind of enrollment components. Something over close to 400,000 electronic health records and about 500,000 biosamples. And you probably can't read the writing on the far right, but there has been a very substantial effort to, as I mentioned earlier, engage individuals from communities historically underrepresented in biomedical research, and I think quite reasonable success in achieving that. And that's defined in many ways in terms of race, ancestry, geography, and socioeconomic status. So some of the kinds of data that are currently in the researcher workbench, and that's the place where an individual goes to access the data for research purposes. So something over 400,000 responses to surveys, 300,000+ physical measurements. At the moment, over 300,000 genotyping array data sets, and about 250,000, just shy of 250,000 whole genome sequences, a handful, 1,000+ long read sequences, and well, you can read the rest. I won't go through every piece here, but it's already a pretty substantial data set. I don't know how readable this is from a distance, but just very quickly, the idea here is that participants will agree to share their data, having gone through the consent process, and then the data is received, and the data kind of centers at Vanderbilt University, and there's a substantial amount of effort to curate the data, and as you can imagine, security and privacy are paramount sort of concerns in the program, and there is, I won't go into details about it, but state-of-the-art security. And as you'll see, anybody who seeks to use the research data needs to undergo training and agree to abide by the rules of security and privacy. Now, there is a researchallofus.org hub, which is where research data are accessible. And there's a public component to that, and you'll see a little bit more about it in a moment, but you can look at very broad data sets. Now, if you actually want to be looking at the data and working with it, it requires doing some education online and agreeing to the rules of engagement, and then ultimately getting access to what you'll see in a minute is a researcher workbench. And there are different tiers of researcher registration. There's a tier that gives you access to things like surveys and a good bit of medical data. If you want genomic data, there's a higher tier that requires additional training and certification. So here's a bit about the public data browser. So you could log on, even as we speak, and look at various kinds of data sets that are summaries. Of course, they're completely unidentified in terms of any individual, but generic data sets that are available. And so these things are widely accessible to anybody that's interested in just seeing in general terms the kind of data that exists within the data set. I won't go into great detail here, and I doubt that this is readable from a distance. But from a researcher's perspective, here are the kind of things that are available to you. So after you've gone through the registration process and certifying your compliance with the various rules of using the data set, you're assigned a workspace, which can be a collaborative workspace. And that's where you see the data. So you don't download data from all of us and then take it with you on your laptop and work with it at your leisure. You work in the cloud on a workspace, which is a secure environment, which once again is critical for engaging the trust of participants. Those who are adept at things like R and Python can make use of Jupyter notebooks that are embedded in the workspace. There are data set builders that include a variety of data views that are kind of baked into the system. And then cohort builder amounts to the ability, for example, to look and search on, well, for I suppose a simple example would be all individuals with type 2 diabetes who have participated in the program. And that can be defined in various ways, ICD-10 codes or medications that they might be taking, for example. And you can build a cohort of individuals defined any way you like, and then a controlled cohort and look at genomic data in the two and identify potentially variants that could be relevant in a GWAS study. A lot of that is sort of built into the system and should be relatively turnkey to use. And there is a substantial amount of online support available, realizing that it takes a bit of training and experience to navigate through the data sets. This is a little bit more detail about the user support hub, which again you can access easily, and it provides lots of instructions, and that QR code brings you to the researchallofus.org support page where you can find a lot of information. And I might add, actually, aside from its value in research, I think it also has a substantial value in terms of training future researchers. Give you an idea of where things stand currently. So there's something over 6,000 registered researchers that have gone through the training that I mentioned. And similarly, almost exactly the same number, it looks like, of active projects. That's not to say it's one-to-one. I mean, there are probably many people with multiple projects. Already, there have been 200 plus publications that have used All of Us data. Over 500 organizations that include 39 historically Black colleges and universities and 54 Hispanic serving institutions. Again, bringing home the point of diversity, including diversity of the researcher community. And point out here, cardiovascular, hypertension, mental health and cancer, and diabetes have so far been among the top conditions that have been studied. There is, as mentioned, a real effort to make sure that the research community is diverse and that responsible and ethical use of data. And there is a real principle of returning value to participant communities. There are, I think, two reasons why people participate. One is you will learn, or at least you have the possibility of learning something about yourself. For example, the return of genomic data that I mentioned earlier, and even some of the simple things like your body measurements. But I think also there is the perception of the need to ensure that communities everywhere not only participate, but ultimately stand to benefit from the data set. What we're trying very much to avoid is what has been a historical problem of genomic, particularly data, having been based on very narrow sampling of individuals or of communities around the world. There is lots of effort to use the data set in a training context and to try to expand as much as possible the institutions that are involved. So again, there is really a kind of interest in being as inclusive as possible. And that brings us to an important point that's highly relevant to this meeting, which is what about international users? When the workbench was first launched, it was restricted to institutions, generally academic institutions, within the United States. And there are obviously lots of people, many of them perhaps in this room, who would like access to the data from outside the United States. And I think what has led it to take a while to make that happen is the importance of maintaining the privacy and the security of data. These are really at top of mind in terms of engaging the trust of participants. So it has taken a while to kind of build the infrastructure to know that one can share the data widely in a way that maintains that kind of covenant of trust with participants. And so there is now an initiative to begin to unroll this workbench to communities outside the US, starting with academic communities. And you can see at the bottom, researchallofus.org/institutional-agreements. And so in order to have access to the data, your institution, this would be an academic institution right now, needs to sign on in terms of rules of use of data. So that would be the first step. And then after that, individual investigators within the institution can then sign on. So if this is of interest, it is unfolding slowly and carefully and deliberately because of the security concerns, but it will be gradually unrolled over time. Similarly, it's not open right now to commercial organizations. I think that too is something that's on the agenda, but is going to require time and care in terms of how that's put together. So where is it going over the course of time? So it's now about, 6 years, I guess, since, or 5 or 6 years since enrollments began. Additional genomic data will be released later over the course of the next year, including 400,000 whole genome sequences and 1,500 long reads. The digital health technologies that can be incorporated will be expanded over time. And there is interest in additional data sets being collected, additional kinds of surveys. And right now there's an Exploring the Mind kind of survey, which is an engaging, almost gamified approach to looking at sort of cognitive functions. There also is an interest in building in ancillary studies, and probably the biggest of these that is already launched is the Nutrition for Precision Health Initiative, which involves, I believe, 6 sites around the country, begins with enrollment of a relatively large number of people to track nutritional data, I think self-reported mostly. But then over time, a smaller number of individuals will have nutritional data monitored much more closely, including ultimately residents in a controlled facility where intake and other metabolic parameters will be very tightly monitored. So this is one example of what's likely to be many over time of incorporating ancillary studies that go much more deeply into particular areas of interest. So with that, I'll end here and just acknowledge that it's the participants who drive this program, and then also the various researchers and teams, which are really very large, that are making it possible to collect data of this degree of richness on 1 million people, and to earn the trust of communities that have historically not really been able to be included. This just gives you a quick shot at the community and provider networks that are involved. And I think the next slide shows even more. Some of the face-to-face meetings, particularly pre-COVID, but even now, are hundreds of people that are involved in the project. So if you want to get involved, you need to confirm your institution's agreement. If that's in the US, many of the institutions that you're probably at have agreed already, but outside the US now it's beginning to be possible for institutions to sign up. You create an account, verify who you are, complete mandatory training, and then sign a data use agreement. And again, you can find a lot of this at researchallofus.org. There is a newsletter called Research Roundup. You can see the QR code to the bottom right, allofus.org. Our sign up that just gives you a kind of snapshot of some of the kinds of data that have been subject to research. And I'll end at that, thanking you all for bearing with us, actually, as the people who really drive this were unable to be here. And you can find out more at allofus.nih.gov. If you're in the US and are interested in joining, it's joinallofus.org, and researchallofus.org is where you go to participate as a researcher. And hopefully we haven't gone over time. Thank you. Okay. Jürgen, I think at the back there.
Obviously, it's incredibly important to have the diverse population of the US represented, and for historical reasons, even more so because of the inequities. Allow me to sort of home in on one particular population that I have a personal interest in, and that is the Latino population. So I lived 20 years in California, and it's not 16% there. It's clearly the largest population in California and probably approaching 50%. But there is an additional issue, whether the population all of us is studying is actually reflective of the population that's physically present in the US. So there is undocumented people. How much is known whether the population that's being studied by all of us is in fact reflective of the population physically present in the United States?
Yeah, no, it's an important question. I'm not sure I can give you an authoritative answer. I can tell you that, from our point of view, doing enrollments, we don't ask for evidence of citizenship or anything like that that would tell you that people are or aren't documented. So people coming into our program who either are patients seen in our facility, but oftentimes not. We do quite a bit of recruitment, and nationally there are so-called direct volunteers. You don't need to provide your social security number or anything that would identify you as a citizen. So from that perspective, at least, it's not selective in that way, to my knowledge. How we know that it reflects all of that, because you can imagine there could be lots of reasons why people who are concerned about this would not be so forthcoming, and I can't really tell you for fact that we've accomplished that.
Hi, Bruce. This is Rob Morton from the Novo Nordisk Foundation. First, just congratulations. This is fantastic. I'm curious if you could put a few words to your consenting, and maybe in particular recall by genotype or any recall opportunities through all of us.
I'm sorry, I wasn't entirely able to hear.
Did you consider recall by genotype, or any recalling of participants based on some features that you find?
So you're asking whether, based on something that's been found, you would call back a participant to get more information? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, any recall. For example, let's say I find a specific mutation, I recall them back. I can predict that they may respond to drug A better than drug B, so I do a clinical trial on those people that I recalled as an example. But I'm just curious, any recall?
To my knowledge, I don't believe there is any at this point in time. The information available to researchers does not permit identification of individual participants. So you would, as far as I'm aware, not have the ability to do that sort of thing. And the return of results that currently is occurring is really not happening through the researchers. It's really through the counseling component. And it's very restricted in terms of genes. Actually, the FDA has been involved in terms of certifying the ability to return. So that, if something were to be found that's not on that approved list, it would not be returned. And it's understood by participants that this is participation in a research program. This is not meant to substitute for clinical testing.
Thank you very much. I'm Colette Dandara from Cape Town. A beautiful program that you have. I've got 3 short questions. The first one is, I see that this is funded by the NIH, but in a non-traditional way that we are used to, of a grant that comes to an end. Can you comment on the strategy in terms of, is this a program that is ongoing? Does it have a date when you're going to say we are done with the number of participants that are in the database? And then secondly, there are a lot of biomedical companies in the US that do direct-to-consumer testing and all that. Is there an opportunity for them to tag on to all of us and also share their data so that it becomes part of the awesome data that is available to the public? Thank you.
It's a little hard to hear up here. All the speakers face that way, but I think you were asking first about the funding and is this an ongoing thing? And so the NIH stays very involved. This is not a traditional grant mechanism where you apply for a grant and you're pretty much, on your own to conduct the research and, you give progress reports. Here, the NIH, it's called another transaction mechanism, and they're very much involved, and there are milestones and reporting constantly and communication with program officers. So it's an NIH-run program. It's not a grant mechanism for people to do research. And there are many different avenues. Now, it's in its second 5 years, and there's a process undergoing right now trying to expand the base of recruitment centers and to make sure that the ones that have been recruiting, stay involved, but also new ones are added. But it's all through this other transaction mechanism. And I'm sorry, I forgot the second part of your question. Oh. Yeah, I'm not aware of any mechanism for companies that might be themselves accruing data to merge those data sets into the all of us data set. If there are any plans of that, I don't believe I've heard of that. And as I mentioned before, I think it's recognized that industry has an important sort of role here and surely an interest in accessing data. It is on the agenda to come up with ways to engage industry. I don't think they're ready at this moment to open those doors, but that is definitely something that's recognized as an important area.
Okay, last question.
So Matt Brown from Genomics England. Look, I'm really fascinated about the return of genomic results to participants, and I'd be interested to know what proportion actually took that offer up, what the experience has been, and in particular, how you manage the pharmacogenomic reporting, given that that's something where there's actually an ongoing healthcare related result. It's a bit different to the others where you're basically just giving, an out of interest thing like Ancestry.
Yeah, so I'll say, the principle at stake here is that there was a kind of a covenant with participants of transparency and return of value. And it's recognized that, returning information about genomic data that is potentially medically relevant, that includes those actionable genes and also pharmacogenetic data, is a complicated area because, there is the potential, first of all, of returning a result that perhaps could make a big difference in terms of healthcare, not always knowing how the individual even is going to act on that and get healthcare that might be relevant. And then on the other side, many of these genes, maybe most of them, are incompletely penetrant, and there's not a guarantee that carrying a pathogenic or likely pathogenic variant means you will actually get the thing that that gene puts you at some risk for. So these are all recognized, and that's why a genetic counseling resource was put in place to be sure that participants, and it's going to be a relatively small number, probably 3% or so, who get a return of results, at least with the current list of genes. But 3% of a million is still a non-trivial number. And I don't know what the exact number that has actually had a return of results is at the moment. It's taken a while to ramp up the genomics, but I know there have been returns. And I'll tell you, as a PI of one of the recruitment areas, we have no idea about individuals in our region, for example, who might have gotten a return of results because they don't inform us. This is between the counseling resource and the participant to decide what to do. And the pharmacogenetic data, it's an interesting issue because, I guess there is the potential that a person could take this and make personal decisions about medications that they are taking or might take someday, which might not be the best choices to make in an instance where it's not the whole picture in terms of what the efficacy of that drug might be. I can only say that there's a lot of educational material that's provided together with it, and it's relatively broad information that's provided back. But nonetheless, it is possible that there could be information that might not be interpreted correctly. But I think there is a trust of participants that is really a cornerstone to this program, and accompanied with educational materials, and individuals, of course, can share the information with their health providers. And so that's the kind of principle that led that to be put in place that way.
Thank you, Bruce. So let's show our appreciation to Bruce in the usual manner. Thank you.